The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. And in this edition we're very pleased to welcome to the set of our show for the first time Miss Rae Vogeler. She's the Green Party candidate running for the U.S. Senate seat against Herb Kohl, who's the Democratic candidate, and Robert Lorge, who's the Republican candidate. There is not a primary necessarily in this race. I mean, you can certainly go to the polls and vote in the primary, but no one has any opposition other than the other candidates in Democrat and Republican races here. I don't know if that made any sense, but basically what I'm saying is she is not running against any other Green Party candidate. So with that being said, thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the air. I really appreciate it.
We know your schedule is very busy, and you've been very active all over the state, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get into the show. But why don't we start out by you just telling viewers and us a little bit about who Rae Vogeler is and why you're seeking a U.S. Senate seat.
Yes, I'm an ordinary person. I'm a mother, a working mom with two kids. I have two boys, 9 and 14 years old. And a big part of why I'm running for office is I'm concerned about their future and the future of other kids here in the state of Wisconsin. And I'm running because of that generation, the future generations, and the fact that we need to be thinking about what's going on here in Wisconsin. As I've toured the state, I've been all over, thousands of miles, and I keep hearing from people that they're very concerned about what's going on in Washington. And they're also concerned that people in Washington, in the Senate, are in this millionaires club, and that there's a lot of millionaires in that, and these people are not representing the common ordinary folk. So I think this is something that's very important about my campaign, is I'm taking it to the people. I'm doing listening sessions all around the state. I plan to be in each of the 72 counties, and I'm on the way already, really getting there, putting on thousands of miles. And I have a background as a community organizer. I've been working for 30 years on issues that relate to women, children, the elderly, peace and justice, the environment. So I'm coming from a background of someone who cares about these issues. And I want to go to Washington to take the next step, be there as another senator for Wisconsin who would be a voice for the people.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned in the open, you're running as a Green Party candidate.
Right.
And Tony is a Green Party member as well, and has run as a Green Party candidate before for state assembly. I don't think a lot of people really understand what Greens are, though. So maybe both of you could kind of share with us what a Green Party candidate stands for, what the Green Party as a whole tends to stand for.
We look so threatening, don't we?
We're just regular people like everybody else. That's what it comes down to.
Why don't you explain? Actually, in interest of full disclosure, I have to say that I am a strong supporter of Rae's, and just spoke at a rally that she attended at South Park in Oshkosh. But why don't you take the question, what does the Green Party stand for?
Right, and what it means to me as well. I have been involved in the Green Party since about the 1980s, and I have been in Milwaukee at that time. I've been in the state of Wisconsin my entire life, and I had been there 40 years and very concerned about the environment. So I sought out the Green Party because the Green Party was an organization that was very concerned about not just peace and justice, which is critically important, but also the environment, and that's what stands out for us. So in Milwaukee, we were concerned about issues of pollution being dumped into the lakes, being dumped into the rivers, emissions into the air, and that's one of the 4 pillars of the Green Party, ecological wisdom, that we're concerned about the environment for our children and the future generations.
Okay.
So that's one of the 4 pillars.
Okay. Why don't you get into the other 3? What are the other 3 pillars?
Social justice. And again, social justice is something that I can relate to personally. When I first became involved in political activism, I had a lot to do with being a woman and a young woman, and concerned about the fact that my brothers, for example, could get jobs that I couldn't get. So social justice is important to me as an individual and also to all of us, that we all have the same equal rights under the law, and that we have the same opportunities.
Okay.
Right.
And what
Peace and
about
nonviolence?
Peace and nonviolence. This is something that the Green Party and I have been involved in for many, many years. And we believe that nonviolence starts with a foreign policy that is one not of aggression, but that we are a member of the United Nations and of the world community. And what that means is that we don't have the U.S. going off into other lands, such as Iraq, such as Afghanistan, possibly Iran, and trying to control other countries, that we solve any kind of conflicts that take place in diplomatic ways. And we work through the United Nations, and that we are part of the world community. And see, that is also very good, not just for the rest of the world, but for the people here at home. Because as I'm touring the state, most people in Wisconsin are saying, what the heck are we doing there in Iraq anyways?
Right.
So that's a big part of what the Green Party is all about. And then grassroots democracy, essential. And that's a part of my campaign, going back to the basics, to people throughout the state, not running $1 million TV ads like my opponent, but actually being willing to listen to people and have them ask me questions, like today as you're asking me questions. So grassroots democracy means really at the grassroots level, people in their communities organizing for social change and also change in government.
All right. You are running against Herb Kohl. He's been in for 18 years, 12
18,
years?
I think.
That's right.
What has Herb Kohl done wrong? You obviously think he should be removed from office. What has he done wrong?
Well, Herb Kohl, number one, voted for the Iraq War. And he not only voted for that war, but he keeps saying, let's stay the course. The majority of Americans, the majority of people in Wisconsin say it's time to end that war. And he's not listening. I, on the other hand, have been a peace organizer for many, many years. And even before that war, as a constituent, went to speak with him, never met the man, because he wouldn't speak with us as constituents about this Iraq war. And we told him, you know, through various actions and through organizing and through letters and through phone messages, but never met with a man. So he wasn't listening. And that's number one. He voted for the war. I think that we need to bring the troops home and bring them home now. He voted for the Patriot Act. I believe that that is an infringement on civil liberties. He voted for the bankruptcy bill, and this is where I've heard people saying, that's it. That's the end. I'm not going to vote for Herb Kohl because this bankruptcy bill is very much against working people, individuals who declare bankruptcy, and often it happens because people can't pay medical costs.
Right.
And so he's against the working person, the common person. He also voted for Bush's energy bill. And this, again, a big giveaway to the oil companies who make huge profits. I mean, look at our gas prices now. And on the other hand, he goes and votes against renewable energy, funding that. In addition, he voted for tax cuts for the rich, from which he directly benefits.
Okay. Healthcare is certainly one of the concerns at the top of, I think, probably everybody's list. And the voice for some kind of universal healthcare seems to be getting a little bit louder every single week. Where do you stand on some type of national healthcare, socialized medicine, whatever you want to call it?
Yes, I fully support a single-payer universal health care system. I think it's something that we can do, we should do, we need to do it very quickly. And as you're saying, I'm hearing more and more from Washington, from the states, legislatures, that people want this. They're crying out for help. And every single listening session that I've had, every single house party I've gone to, even today, I hear about another statistic, another person that does not have health care. And I believe it's a right, and it's something that we can do, and it's being done all over the world. I mean, we are the richest nation in the world, and we can't afford it. And the fact that we're spending $100,000 a minute in Iraq, and we can't even take care of our own here at home is really a shame.
But that's always been the case. You know, we do in other countries and we don't do here at home. And personally, I mean, I'm not running for office here, but I believe that we need some type of national health care as well.
Right.
Some type of universal plan. But what opponents to that say, and I'm sure you've heard it, is that we can't afford it, it'll bankrupt us, it's not good for business. How do you respond to those things other than to say we're spending all this per minute in Iraq?
Right. Well, let's look at the discretionary budget for 2006. That'll give you an idea of where the priorities of Washington are at. And those priorities are very skewed and out of touch with the vast majority of Americans. 57% of the budget for 2006 that was introduced by Bush and then voted on by Congress was for defense. 8% was for a combination of education, jobs, training, and social services, only 8%. 5% was health care. So in other words, the money is there. And we can also look at just comparing where the budget cuts are coming from right now. Congress recently put forward $50 billion in cuts for education, just for example, while giving $57 billion in tax write-offs for the rich. So the money is there. And then also, what does this mean for the local economy? If we had national health care, what it would do is it would open up more jobs, because many businesses right now are saying, gee, I can't afford to hire people.
Right.
I can't afford these medical costs. And then I just spoke with farmers recently who said, I can't afford to have health insurance because I'm a small farmer. And so what that does is it puts people out of the economy. In other words, more and more farmers are going under. And so what it will do, actually, is if we have national health insurance, it would create more jobs. It would create a more productive society, and people would be able to work jobs that they really like, because a good number of people are working jobs that are kind of dead end, they don't like them, but they do it because they need the health insurance.
Okay, but the private insurance lobby, pharmaceuticals, they're very powerful in Washington. They've bought out probably 90% of the Senate.
Right.
So how does Rae Vogeler go to Washington and take on those powerful lobbies? How do you manage to even get a conversation going about a single-payer healthcare plan?
Well, I think the conversation is already happening, and that's the point that I'm making. My bringing this up is actually not a novel idea. It's not a new idea. It's not necessarily just a Green Party idea. It's actually an idea that's resonating throughout the entire country right now, throughout the economy. And for example, Russ Feingold was talking about this and saying, let's test it in a few states. So that shows the fact that it's coming from below, from the grassroots, and it's not something new, and it wouldn't be me being a maverick. What I would be able to do is, as a Green Party senator, and I intend to go to Washington, and I'm organizing and campaigning to win, that I would be able to dialogue with other senators and have that power to put forward this legislation. And I think the time is ripe, and I think it's going to happen in the next few years, actually, because there's such a need for it, and people are saying that we cannot continue with the economy the way it is and people being out of health insurance. And in fact, it's costing the taxpayer, because some people that don't have health insurance end up going and seeking out emergency services, and then that comes off public funds, and it costs more.
Let's go back to the war for a minute. The position that you're taking, which I support your position, is derisively called the cut and run position. How do you respond to that?
Well, if you're not winning, and you don't know how you can win, and you don't even know what winning means, I mean, how do you win this war? What are the end results that we're trying to achieve? How do you claim victory? Then, on top of that, spending all this money, we're talking billions, $307 billion spent already on the war. Every time I speak, it's a couple more billion every week. So when you have no measurable gains, you have no exit strategy, you have all this money being hemorrhaged out of our economy into this war, and defense contractors making $1,000 a day, people here at home out of jobs. What I say is, if it's not working, stop it. We don't want another Vietnam where it goes on for years and years and years, because in fact there's no way to claim victory in Iraq. The people there don't want us. 87% of the Iraqis say, hey, you know, get out of our country because you're not fixing it, you're not helping us, and most people in Iraq are actually unemployed right now.
Right.
So, so the fact is, if it's not working and it's not to the benefit of the Iraqi people, which it's not, these people are dying in the thousands. We have our service personnel coming home wounded. Let's just call it quits and get on with what we need to be doing. And on top of that, we need to bring those troops home so they can take care of natural disasters here. I mean, where were they? Hurricane Katrina. They're off in Iraq.
Right. You had mentioned, and this relates to the war, Rae, you had mentioned that, the Green Party stands for solving conflicts in diplomatic ways, and I think that's always a good idea.
Right.
I don't know if it's more idealistic, though, than realistic in some cases. I mean, the war, for example. I mean, I don't know that we have any business being over there.
Right.
I think most of us have changed our minds on that,
Right,
if we ever did support it.
Right.
But we are dealing with people over there who are not very rational. They have no sense of diplomacy. How do you deal with people like that when they don't understand diplomacy like we do?
Well, see, I look at it differently. We were not asked to come in there. We were not asked to be visitors. We were not asked to come in and change their government, and we were not asked to come in there and privatize their oil industry. So, in fact, the war is one of aggression. We are occupying. We're an occupied force. And if we just turn the tables, let's think of it from our perspective. How would we feel in our neighborhoods if a foreign army comes into Oshkosh, for example, and takes over the government, takes over the, let's say we had an oil industry, or takes over the oil industry, and starts telling people how to run their country, their business, and then does it by the force of a gun. So the fact is that people aren't going to be, quote, rational under those circumstances. Most people will say, I resist that because this is my country and I want to take care of my own people. And on top of that, thousands and thousands of civilians have died. This isn't just a war of armies.
Right.
And I think it'd be very hard for people to be rational. I know I'd have a lot of trouble being rational if my children died in war and somebody bombed my house accidentally. Maybe it wasn't intended. But so I think the best thing is to say, war is not rational. And there really were no weapons of mass destruction, which was the rationale for the war. And there were no Iraqi ties to Al-Qaeda. And in fact, there were no Iraqis on the planes that struck the Twin Towers. So all the reasons for war we found to be unfounded. But the bottom line is that we're occupying that country and people don't want us there. And the majority of Americans are saying, let's get out.
Okay.
Right.
The president claims that the Iraq is part of the war on terror. Whatever this war on terror is. Let's talk about it for a while.
Right.
Part of this war on terrorism was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, which I imagine Herb Kohl voted for.
Right.
How do you feel about the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, I think it's a very inefficient organization. I've talked to people who work for FEMA, for example. FEMA now.
What is FEMA?
The Federal Emergency Management Administration. Okay. FEMA is the administration that is taking care of natural disasters and emergencies. For example, Stoughton. I live in the little village of Oregon, south of Madison. Stoughton's a little bit east of us. A tornado went through about a year ago. I saw it, actually. It went over my house. Luckily, I didn't get hit. People in Stoughton didn't get one penny, not one penny, from FEMA, and many of the people that were victims of Hurricane Katrina have not come back. So, and I talked to a man not too long ago. I said, problem with Homeland Security is it's doing too much. It's all these different departments coming together and they're all mismanaged. On top of that, we have that being used as a basis for so-called surveillance and basically counterintelligence on people here in this country. And frankly, people in this country don't want somebody snooping around in their house and checking out who they're talking to on the phone or what books they're getting out of the library. And that's all part of Homeland Security. That creates a lot of fear, more fear than the fear that we already have about
So, I mean, it sounds like you're completely opposed to the way the Bush administration has fought the so-called war on terrorism. Herb Kohl has supported much of what they've created, if not the entire program.
Right.
So what is your perspective on this thing called the war on terrorism and how it should be fought?
Well, I think the Bush administration has a lot of buzzwords. War on terror. Okay, where did they come from? When we had that awful disaster 9/11, I, like everybody else, was just in tears. It was just an awful thing. But you don't take people's fears and manipulate them. You do not take people's fears and then use that as a basis to go off to war in other lands, because face it, the more we occupy other countries, the more we are violating other people or going off to war, the more violence we beget, right? And it is actually counterproductive, because when we're off in these other countries, people are not happy that we're there, and that actually creates more hostility. So I think the Bush administration manipulated the fear, and it was very bad, and talked about this war on terror. In fact, people around the world and other countries are saying, well, the Bush administration is part of that. By going into other places and dropping bombs or doing any of those kind of violent acts, that's considered terror as well. So the bottom line for me is that we need to start looking at things in a different way and not feed into that, the war on terror, because the war on terror is also a part of the U.S. foreign policy, and meaning that we are going to other countries and they see us in that same light.
Okay, all right.
But what would be a genuine, let me back up. What should the U.S. have done after 9/11?
Okay.
You're saying that the U.S. should not have invaded Afghanistan.
Right.
And obviously should not have invaded Iraq. So what should the U.S. have done after 9/11? If you were in the U.S. Senate at that time, what would you have called for?
Yes, and I have a definite answer to that. I was following that closely. The U.S. should have provided the paperwork to the government of Afghanistan for Osama bin Laden. This is a little known fact that that government, Afghanistan, said, okay, President Bush, if you want to see him come before an international criminal court, provide the proper paperwork and we have him. They actually had him. And we will have him go to trial. And he will be tried for crimes against humanity. He should have. And that's what we should have done. That would have prevented a war on Afghanistan. That would have prevented the loss of life here of our troops unnecessarily. And it would have brought this person to justice. And in fact, we've been doing since then, the last almost 5 years now, is fighting in Afghanistan, and Osama bin Laden hasn't been captured.
No, he hasn't.
Right. Right.
Cheryl?
I want to go back to the healthcare system for just a moment. You know, I know that you said that probably in the next few years we'll see some kind of national healthcare plan.
Right.
But for now, anyway, our healthcare system is what it is, and it's
Right.
pretty deplorable.
Right.
So if you're elected to the U.S. Senate, Rae, what kind of legislation would you support or bring forward that would help to keep healthcare affordable, and for those who are unemployed, put some kind of program in place where they would at least have some kind of, if nothing else, minimal coverage?
Right. And I like to speak to that issue of jobs, too, as it relates to that. First of all, I don't think that health care should be tied to a job. But I do think that if people, right now, given that we are in this interim period, that employers must provide health care, and if well, basically, if they can't do it, the government needs to back up these employers, because people are losing their health insurance. I'll tell you honestly, it happened to me. It happened to my family. My husband was working for a company, and this was only a few years back. All of a sudden, that company stopped paying health insurance. What happened to that was all these people are going to seek medical care, and then we got stuck with the bill. So first of all, that is not permissible. That cannot happen, because individuals shouldn't be stuck with those bills. On top of that, I think we need to be talking about the prescription costs. We need to have caps on that, and we need to be also trying to keep the cost down for the consumer, because these costs are just skyrocketing. And we even hear about on TV how folks are going over to other countries to seek out medical care because the costs are much lower. So we need to work on those kind of issues. As you say, a stopgap measure, making sure that it's affordable and that it's something that is provided with jobs and that people do have health care. And then of course those who don't have jobs, that they have access to health care through the public community, through public funds.
Okay, all right.
Let's, do you want to continue?
No,
Or-
no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Let's talk about Social Security, which for the elderly in America is heavily related to their own health care. The Bush administration has been pushing for some kind of privatization of Social Security. It's been stifled in the Senate.
Right.
What's your position on what we need to do with Social Security?
Yes, I oppose privatization of Social Security. It's something that all these past generations, including myself, my family, my friends, my grandparents, put that money in. And I want to make sure it's there for myself and for future generations and for all the people here in Wisconsin and throughout the country. Privatizing it puts it at risk. And this is not something that we can put at risk. There are a good number of people, especially elderly folks, who rely on that money. I mean, that helps them to get by in retirement. And also, what's happening is a lot of people who are retiring now do not have pensions.
Right.
And because we don't have pensions, individuals who are older are relying more and more on Social Security just to get by. So it's something that we need to make sure that it's sound and it's firm and it's part of the public good.
Well, let's try to get more specific about it. I mean, at some point there are going to be tremendous financial strains on it, right? Do you support things like, they used to call it means testing for Social Security? That why does someone like Bill Gates or Donald Trump, you know, why should they be getting Social Security checks?
Right.
I mean, should there be kind of a means testing? Is that something you'd support?
I would support that. I also would support, just in general, talking about Bill Gates and people that have a lot of money, I think we need to equalize income in general, and the way that we can do that is those who have high incomes like that shouldn't be getting all these write-offs and all these tax cuts, because that in a lot of ways bankrupting our economy right now. We're finding that we have an $8.3 trillion deficit, and on top of that we have all these tax cuts for these very wealthy people. They don't need it. And at the same token, people like us have our taxes going up and up and up, right? They've gone up 25% over the course of the last few years, and we all know it. So yes, I think that we need to be looking more at the fact that in this country, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is very, very squeezed. And that's exactly what I've seen as I'm traveling the state.
Well, what about, you know, there's some lawmakers who are actually very much in support of providing Social Security for illegal immigrants. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you something I just found out that's very interesting. A friend of mine was saying that a number of the people who are illegal immigrants are actually paying into Social Security. I wasn't aware of that. But she said that some of these employers are bringing these people up from Central and South America, and they get these fake Social Security numbers, and they know it. So the employers are kind of turning the other way. These people are paying in, and yet they're undocumented. They don't get any money back. So it's a very interesting dynamic when in fact these people who are working, they're paying in, but they're not getting the relief back to them. So it's something we need to think about.
Let's talk about immigration for a couple of minutes. The Bush administration is actually at odds with the Senate Republicans on this, because Bush supports something called the guest worker program that eventually would lead to citizenship. And the Senate Republicans especially have been opposed to that. What do you think needs to happen with immigration? Should it be easier for people to become citizens? Should people who are already here be granted what's called, I guess, amnesty? They become citizens? What's your take on immigration?
Well, this country was founded on immigration. The vast majority of people that live here had family that came from other lands, and it's just in the recent history now that we're having these so-called immigration problems. I think it's actually very tied to color, to race, and the fact that we're calling these people illegal immigrants and undocumented workers, and these people are aliens. people that came, well, my family came from Slovenia, right? This is northern Yugoslavia area. I also have, my family came from Germany. I had family that came from Slovakia, friends down the street, family from other areas, Ireland. People that came before us, those ancestors, didn't have all those barriers to that extent. And I think that we need to be fair and equitable and see that all human beings are in fact human, and they're legal, and they're working. So the way that we can best ensure that people who are coming from other lands are here and productive members of society is to allow them to become members of this society legally, and then they can produce and they can give back, and that's what they would like to do. And a lot of the families are already being, what I say, separated. So you might have a husband here and a wife in Mexico.
See, I think the answer is to stop wrecking the Mexican economy. Remember back in '92, when Clinton and the Congress passed for NAFTA?
I hear you.
One of the arguments for NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, was that this will greatly reform the Mexican economy. Therefore, you won't have the great levels of poverty there. People won't feel compelled to come over the border. Instead, here we are, 2006. Over 40% of the Mexican population is in dire poverty.
That's right.
NAFTA has made the whole thing much worse.
That's right.
And now here we are with this immigration crisis. So don't we need some kind of global economic reform?
Exactly. Hit the nail on the head. There's two parts to it. One is what I said, and the other is what you said. The fact that a lot of jobs are going south. That happened to me. I worked in a factory, and the factory shut down, and retooling did not take place. All those jobs went south. And the people that got those jobs were getting paid less. They did not have environmental standards, and everybody suffered. So the folks in Mexico didn't get paid well. They didn't have certain safety standards, and the people in Milwaukee, this is where I was at that point, lost their jobs. So yes, we need to have what I would say a way of equalizing and making sure that the jobs here are secure and the jobs here are good, and that we're not having these companies exporting jobs all over the world, but especially to people that are not getting paid right. So NAFTA and CAFTA do not work for any working people here, and they don't work for people in these other countries.
Well, would you support something like a global living wage, so that it would not be profitable for a business to go south or anywhere else?
Exactly.
And I don't hear anyone in the U.S. Senate pushing for that.
See, and it makes total sense. If we had a living wage here and a living wage there, wherever there might be, these companies wouldn't be making these huge profits by paying these kids child labor and 8 cents an hour or whatever it might be. So the fact is we need a living wage here, and people are crying out for that. We need a living wage in the other countries, and then that will equalize, and then there won't be so much, like you're saying, people coming over the border.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much like the European Union model, where for years Turkey was not allowed into the European Union because their working standards, wage standards, were so low. And so, yet here in North America, somehow we can have this international free trade while Mexico's wage standards were so low. It invited abuse, and the abuse is what we did have. So obviously, if you get into the U.S. Senate, you'll be opposed to NAFTA and urge its repeal.
And Herb Kohl voted for NAFTA.
And did he also vote for the, was it called the Free Trade Agreement for the Americas, FTAA, is that what it was?
I couldn't tell you the record on that.
Okay, I'm pretty sure he voted for that too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about wages for a moment or two, Rae. You know, in June, the Senate voted to block an increase in the federal minimum wage. And yet, just the week or so prior to that, members of the House voted to give themselves a raise. I think it was the 7th or 8th consecutive one, putting them up to something like $168,000 a year or something like that. You know, people are not able to survive and support their families. A lot of them can't support themselves on the minimum wage. What would you be proposing if you made it into the U.S. Senate as far as a minimum wage? I mean, you've talked in terms of a livable wage. What do you think a livable wage is?
Yes, now the minimum wage that they were talking about, and this happened last year and then this year again, first had been around $6.25, $6.50, and then the other bill had been about $7.25, $7.50. Now it's interesting because Herb Kohl voted against the higher rate. And then I went on the radio and mentioned this, and then later he started to vote a little bit better. So I mean, it's good that we're promoting the fact that we need to be thinking about these issues, right? But that is not a living wage, and we know that. We know that a family cannot support itself even on $6 or $7 an hour. It's just crazy. And let's look at the numbers here in Wisconsin, because see, I kept hearing things from people like, I can't make a living, I'm working several jobs, I work at night, I work during the day, my kids are alone. Why is this going on? And I personally was offered a job last year that paid less than what I made 20 years ago. In that factory I was telling you about that went south, that one, right? Well, I thought I got to figure out the numbers here. The numbers are that in Wisconsin the average wage has gone up only 68 cents in 25 years.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And Wisconsin has the highest poverty growth rate in the country. So we're getting poorer faster. Now, the issue here is not just minimum wage, but living wage. So I would say most people, most experts say a living wage in our economy is about $10 an hour. And so if we can do something like that, I think it makes a lot of sense. Because people need to have a wage where they can work one job, make a living, support their family, and then nurture their kids, because that's what it's all about, providing for their future and providing for their family's future.
Well, and I think that's very true, because if you don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs, you have more time not only for yourself, but for your kids to help rear them in the way they should be reared.
Right.
They wouldn't be left alone as much as so many of our society's kids are these days. And I mean, look what's happening to these kids. They're getting in trouble everywhere you turn. There are kids getting in serious trouble.
Right.
And so that would solve more than just an economic problem. It would solve social issues as well.
Very much. See, and I've been saying that my campaign is very much about family values. If we believe in family values, and that means people sustaining themselves and really feeling part of a family and nurtured, that we need to think about the whole family. And that means education, which we can talk about in a bit, education, healthcare, jobs, and a clean environment, and that we put quality time into our children. And if we're so busy working and trying to get a job where we get health insurance or paying all this money into health insurance, what it does is it takes away from the family, right? And less families are eating dinners together, less and less families are home working on homework, and many more people are working these multiple jobs, and the kids suffer. And like you say, then the kids are on their own and they're getting into trouble. So I make a big point of being home with my family as much as I can, and even as I'm campaigning, my kids often go on the road with me. So it's very much a family affair, and I always make sure that I know the root of it. The root for me, the basis, the foundation for my campaign is about my children and the children of Wisconsin, and the fact that we are trying to make a big difference that will help their lives.
The Congress did pass a Family and Medical Leave Act in the 90s, but it's actually quite mild compared to what many European countries have. What do you think needs to happen with something like family and medical leave?
I think it's essential. It's essential that we do have family medical leave. In fact, in Madison, which is close to where I live in, like, say, the Village of Oregon, there's been this whole issue about sick leave.
Right.
And it was voted down by the Common Council, but quite close. I think it will change probably next year. But the fact is that a lot of people who do not have very good jobs, do not get paid well, cannot afford to take off time when their kids are sick, or when they have an elderly parent, for example, that's sick. So we need to legislate that, I think, at the federal level. This is very, very important. Again, it gets back to family values. If we don't want kids that are sick going to school, right? Because then they're going to get more kids sick. So the bottom line here is that we need to have family medical leave, or family leave, when parents need that, and that extends beyond children, but also
paid leave.
Paid leave. It can't just be where you take time off and you go, okay, well, I'm taking my vacation. That's not going to help, because the fact is people get sick and you lose vacation time, and who can afford that?
Right.
Who can afford to be home?
Well, what about the argument that the businesses are against, the big businesses especially, against this kind of thing? That paid sick leave, paid family leave, that'll destroy business in America. How would you respond to that?
I think quite the opposite. See, if we have paid leave, sick leave. In other words, you get paid to stay home and take care of your sick family member. What we're going to do is have less sick people in the workplace right off the bat. And I have experienced that personally because I've worked in big office buildings, and then one person gets sick and then it goes through the whole air duct system and everybody gets sick. And so I think in the end it's going to cut our medical costs and our number of people that are leaving work because of being sick.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to, continue on that a little bit, and I'm going to plead some ignorance here when it comes to the Family and Medical Leave Act because, I've not been in a situation where I had to use it, thank God. But I do know someone who has had to utilize it recently, and maybe you can answer this question. Is it a provision of this act that you have to, before you can invoke this or use this act, you have to use up your sick pay first, your accumulated sick time first, or is that something specific with this particular employer that that I'm thinking about right here?
I think it may be that employer. My understanding, but maybe Tony could correct me in this, but my understanding is that they're separate, that you have your, you can take sick leave regardless of having your vacation time. My husband, when I gave birth to our first child, he used that. And I thought that was beautiful because he wanted to make sure that we had the time as a family to go on vacation. So he used his vacation time to do that, to go on vacation. But then he used sick leave time that he had through his employer so that he could be home taking care of our child, because that's part of maternity benefits too, that it shouldn't just be the mother or the woman that has to stay home, because women are productive members of society, just like men, and it should go both ways. That if a man wants to stay home and take care of the child, that they can do so.
Yeah, because in this particular case, I thought it was very odd because the employer is requiring that this individual's sick time be used up first before they can start drawing on the Family Medical Leave Act.
Right, right.
And that just, I know that there are certain requirements under which you can only draw on the act and or invoke that privilege.
Right.
And it just seemed kind of odd to me that you may end up with no sick time, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure how that works.
Right.
Let's talk about another issue related to children. The Bush administration, in its first term, got passed really the most comprehensive K-12 reform in 50 years, the No Child Left Behind Act.
Right.
Whether people like it or don't like it, it is fairly radical.
It's very radical.
Yeah. And he got it through with lots of Democratic Party support. Ted Kennedy stood shoulder to shoulder with George Bush when this got passed.
Right.
Are you for No Child Left Behind? I imagine you're probably not, but what do you think needs to happen with K-12?
Okay. First off, Herb Kohl voted for it,
Yep.
and now he keeps talking about, oh boy, what a mistake, and it is a mistake, but he still stands by it. I think it has to be repealed. It needs to be off the books. And let me explain why. This is the first bill that came forward from the federal government where the Department of Defense and the Department of Education enacted one bill. And this bill has not worked for many, many reasons. First off, it requires testing. The testing has to be done at the local levels in all these schools, all the way up, K through 12. And I personally have witnessed this, having 2 kids. The testing requirements are very, very high, and then when the schools don't meet the test results, they lose money. They get sanctioned, is what they call it. So here in Wisconsin, people are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the testing also has another negative consequence, and that is that the teachers are not teaching to tests. So, and the tests are very much driven by reading, writing, arithmetic, and does not really include so much history, social science, the arts. So now, and I heard this personally from someone who retired in Superior, a teacher. She said, I'm out of the school system. I can't do it anymore. I'm retiring. I was able to retire. I am not just going to teach to test, where they actually stand up and they read a test and teach kids how to pass a test. How does that teach children to analyze, to think, to be a productive member of society? And then on top of that, the defunding. So schools are literally closing down. School districts are combining. PTOs are trying to make up for money that's not there, and they're literally raising funds for toilet paper, science books, and everything else. It's just crazy.
So what should the federal government be doing as regards K through 12?
I call for fully funded, first of all, daycare, and also pre-K all the way up through grade 16. I think that we can do it. We have the money, and just a matter of allocating that money for education. And I think it should be done, it needs to be done, and education, just like health care, is a right. Now, let's think of it this way. If children are fully educated, and in our society you need not just a high school education, but a college degree to get a good job, if we say that this is something we're putting our money into, we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? We say you need to get a good education to get a good job, so let's put the money there. Instead, we're defunding schools. And we're also defunding the government, is defunding the colleges. So
yeah, Oshkosh is a university town, so talk to the Oshkosh students for a minute. Why should they support the Rae Vogeler campaign?
Well, I'm saying that we should have fully funded college for students. So in other words, I don't think that people should have to pull out of their pocket, just as years back people had to pay for education, right? Just like years back you had to work 10-hour days, then it became 8 hours a day. Then just as education used to be just a privilege that a few select few could do, right? Now
we're moving back in that direction.
We're moving back. So what I say is let's go forward. Let's make sure education is fully funded, not just K through 12, but pre-K, because more and more kids are going into pre-K, right, as parents are working. And we do require college. We need to do it. Right now, the college costs are just skyrocketing. I don't know how I'm going to...
So you believe, for example, anyone who can make the grades at a public university should get their education fully paid for?
Yes, I do. I believe that, and I know that we can do it financially. I can give you some statistics. Let me just give you a couple. I don't want to give you too many. But one day in Iraq could provide for 17,000 students 1 year at a public college. One day in Iraq. So it's not that we don't have the money, we're just using billions elsewhere. And we're putting the priorities towards war, not towards education.
Okay. Cheryl?
If elected to Congress, or rather to the Senate, how would you address the imbalance between our growing energy needs and the skyrocketing costs of energy?
Well, I think we need to start changing the way that we use energy. Number one, we need more conservation. We need more mass transit in our society to not be so concerned about emissions into the environment and global warming. And on top of that, we need to start developing renewable energy sources. And what I mean by that is solar power, wind power, and geothermal, so on. And this is something that, unfortunately, the people in Washington have not put a priority on. And like I said earlier, coal voted for the Bush bill, which is very much toward the oil companies continuing to use oil, which we know, I mean, we've heard scientists say that we're either at peak or within 5 years we're at peak oil production. So we can't continue to use it. The bottom line is it's going to be gone. There won't be that much oil, and we need to be thinking in other ways. So I think we need to start now. And the time is way overdue. It's very ripe for change, and people are starting to think along those lines. As we're paying $3 for gas for every gallon, as I'm traveling the state, people are already going, we got to think of other ways.
Why do you think it is, Rae, that this nation is so slow to react to things like that? I mean, we've heard for years that we're going to be at peak, and yet we're just not moving in that direction to find other sources of energy. Why are we so reactionary rather than being proactive?
Well, I think that the will of the people, the everyday person out on the streets, is more towards environmental conservation. I think people are changing their way of being. People are concerned about that. They're driving less. I mean, face it, people are driving less. I think it has to do with the oil lobby. We have Washington run amok by these corporate lobbyists. Oil companies are one example, and they're the ones that, there are more lobbyists in Washington than there are people who represent us. And these people make huge, huge record profits off of the oil business. along with the transportation business and so on. So it's like money talks. But I don't think that represents where most people are at. And again, I think what it shows is that the senators, for example, are out of sync with the people they're representing.
Right.
Okay.
As a member of the United States Senate, you'd vote on Supreme Court nominees.
Right.
President Bush was able to get John Roberts and Samuel Alito on the court.
Right.
How would you have voted on them?
I would have voted against both.
Why?
They are both very conservative. And what I mean by that is in a way that they're taking the country back. They do not believe in equal rights for all people. They, in my opinion, are very prejudiced against certain groupings of people, and their rulings have shown that. They are not for the working people. They are not for women. They are not for gay rights. They are not for economic equality. All of those things that have been fought for many years, these two people in particular represent a shift backward. And I think that this is something where when you are a senator, you need to be there representing your constituents. And Cole, both times, did not represent his constituents by voting for John Roberts. And he voted for cloture on Alito, meaning he voted to end the filibuster, knowing that he was going to pass.
Okay. You mentioned gay rights in there. What's your view on gay marriage?
I support that, and I support the fact that people have equality or should have equality in our society and not be discriminated against. And I feel that we need to have a gentler, kinder society here, and the fact that people are starting to look towards that kind of an issue and put all this energy into a ban on gay marriage does not bode well for us. And if you discriminate against one grouping of people, you discriminate against many other people. And also, it comes down to the fact that people should have the right to choose who they're with. And I believe at a very fundamental level. And it doesn't affect other people. It's not like it's hurting someone else.
I want to talk about a couple of third-party issues. I've run as a Green Party candidate, and the two things you get hit with the most are the best you can be is a spoiler. You can spoil it for usually the Democratic Party candidate. And the second thing is that if you get elected as a Green Party candidate, the other parties won't invite you into their closed caucuses, so you can't be effective. How do you take those issues on, the spoiler and the not being invited into caucus? What do you say about that?
Well, the beauty of my race right now, it's the race that I wanted, because I see it as me against Herb Kohl. The individual who's running for the Republican Party is not endorsed by the Republican Party. He is not running the kind of active campaign that I am. So people don't have to worry about that so-called spoiler issue. They can vote their conscience. They can vote for a working person, Rae Vogeler, working mom, representing them, someone who puts food on the table, has to put her kids through college, knows all the issues that most people in Wisconsin do, and deals with those daily crises. Herb Kohl does not. So it's not even a spoiler issue whatsoever, and people can vote their conscience. Vote for who you believe in. Don't vote out of fear. Vote for someone that you want to truly represent you.
Okay. What about the second issue, that as a Green Party person, being 1 out of 100, you'd be on the outs, that the other parties won't even listen to you? They do most of their business in closed session, which I think is just bogus.
Right.
So how do you deal with this, that they won't even invite you into their sessions?
I think quite the opposite. I think it actually would be turned on its head. The fact that we would have Republicans and Democrats who need to get work done, they have bills that they need to have co-sponsored, that they would actually come to a Green Party politician, me, the next U.S. Senator, and say, would you join me on this? Because I would have incredible power. I mean, we're talking 100 people in the Senate, only 100 people out of the entire nation making these incredible decisions.
And you know, they need 51 votes to pass any bill.
Right.
They need, I think, 34 votes to end a filibuster.
Right.
So your vote actually becomes crucial. I mean, I agree with you.
Right.
You'd be the most popular U.S. Senator.
Right.
Because both sides would really need that one vote because they're so divided right now.
Exactly.
I mean, I think the people of Wisconsin need to listen to that.
It's right.
Jim Jeffords from Vermont, the moment he became an independent. He left the Republican Party. His stock went up dramatically.
Right.
He got courted by all sides, and that's what I think would happen with Senator Rae Vogeler.
Right.
So I hope the population is listening to that. That would greatly increase, I think, our state's power in D.C.
It would. It would. And the other thing is that my opponent hasn't been a maverick. People keep saying, what is he doing? I don't even know. Is he initiating legislation? What's the man doing? He seems like a person that doesn't want the job. He's not out campaigning, number one. And when he's there, he's not doing a whole lot except for voting against people, as these votes I've talked about. I, on the other hand, want that job. And I would be a maverick. I would be a voice for Wisconsin. I would be a person that would be there representing people, knowing where I came from, and I also would turn over my office to the people of Wisconsin. So rather than looking at the corporate lobbyists, oil, credit card companies, defense contractors, I would make sure that the people of Wisconsin would be represented, and they would actually be there in Washington. I would have people come with me. So it's a big difference between how things are being done now and how things could be done.
Okay. Real quickly, we're down to about 2 minutes here, but what specific changes, Rae, do you think we need to make within our tax code so that we're not burdening the taxpayer, be it an individual or a business, and yet at the same time not slowing our economy?
Right. Well, I think taxes need to be fair. And if we look at the trend, in 1940, corporations pay about 33% in taxes. Right now they're paying about 7%. So the trend has been that, again, these big lobbyists in Washington are taking the money from us, regular everyday folks, more and more, and taking less from these big companies. And that's happening. That divide is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Face it, these companies are making record profits. A lot of them have a lot of money, and that money needs to come back into the economy. They need to be a useful part of society. So I think we need to shift the tax burden, have be more progressive, and those who are making lots of money will pay a greater percentage, and those who can't get by will pay less. And it would be fair, or get back to the way it had been for some time, and even make it more fair. And that way that will generate more of an economy, a positive economy, and people will have more money to spend, and people have more money to be productive members of society.
Okay. Do you have a real quick question?
I think we should get to the closing statement.
Okay, all right. Well, why don't you take about a minute or so then, Rae, and look into camera 3 and tell people why they should vote for you for U.S. Senate.
Yes, people should vote for me for U.S. Senate because I am a person of Wisconsin who knows what it's like to work for a living, raise up my kids, try to get them off to college, and keep them from being swept off to war. I am someone who understands those concerns and who lives them intimately every single day, just like you. And that's the kind of person that most people are telling me around the state they want in Washington. Someone who can look out for their interests, be among them, listen to them, and go to Washington and remember who I am and vote on behalf of Wisconsin. I think we need a voice for Wisconsin. We need someone who gets back to the basics of family values, of making sure we bring the troops home from Iraq as soon as possible. Now is the time to begin, and put that money that's being wasted in Iraq into jobs, education, health care, a clean environment, so that we have a good future for our kids.
And your website is voterae.org.
Voterae.org, VOTERAE.org. Thank you.
We've been putting it up on the screen throughout the show, and it was just up there as you were giving your closing statement. So, well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful hour with you.
Thank you so much
for coming and visiting us.
Thank you.
And Tony, thanks to you, and of course, thanks to you at home for letting us in your homes for the last hour. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care and keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.